Zoom. And then I'll start sharing my screen. There we go. There we go. Okay, can you see my whole screen? Cool. Okay. All right, hello everyone, welcome. So today, my name is Nikesha Jeter. I'm the school counselor at Lincoln Elementary. And today's topic is going to be talking to your children about racism and discrimination. I'll introduce my colleague here.
Hi, everybody. My name is Kowina Cole. I work with Lancaster School District with the Foster Ed program, and I'm a program manager. Today, during this training, we're going to cover a few topics, starting with definitions and terms as it relates to racism and discrimination, when to begin conversations and common mistakes that are made when trying to have these conversations with our children, why it's important to talk about kids about this topic, some anti-racist parents and raising race-conscious children tips. We're also going to talk about what can my family do to combat racism, and then ways in which parents and educators are able to work together around this topic of race and raising conscious children.
So the first thing here that we wanted you guys to share, if you're willing, is talking about race and how does that feel? So we're going to pause for a minute so you guys can enter your thoughts in the chat box. And I don't know, Queen, if you can see the chat, if anything pops up, I can't see it.
I have not seen anything in the chat box yet.
Okay.
So our first comment says, I feel that in my position, I have to be braver than I feel.
I like that. We'll get a little bit into kind of some topics surrounding that. I like that.
Another comment we have is, I feel like I need to choose words carefully.
And feel free to continue to enter comments as they come up. You guys are welcome to do that anytime.
So we're going to start with definitions. I think part of having this conversation is being sure that we are grounded in fact and not so much just perception or what we think things mean. And so we wanted to spend a good amount of time really defining what different concepts mean and then being able to apply that to the conversations that we have with our children. So one is to start with race, which is defined as any one of the groups that humans are often divided into based on their physical traits, regarded as common among people of shared ancestry. And it's important to note that race as a biological construct is not actually a thing. Really, there's a human race. We are all the same in terms of that. But when it comes to a social political context, race is very relevant. And it is very influential in the ways in which we conversate and interact with other individuals. So from a social political perspective, race is defined as that of one's skin color, which defines their reality and the way in which they're treated in society. So again, biologically, we are the same as human beings, but as it pertains to our country, our society, and the ways that we're treated, race can and does differentiate us. Ethnicity is sometimes used as a synonym to race, and it is of or relating to large groups of people classed according to common racial, national, tribal, religious, linguistic, or cultural origin or background. And so you will hear that used interchangeably sometimes in conversations around race, but it's very similar.
And some more definitions for you. First is prejudice, and it is the negative or positive idealized attitudes, thoughts, and beliefs about an entire category of people formed without full knowledge or examination of facts. And then racism, um, the clear definition is prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism directed against a person or people on the basis of their membership in a particular racial or ethnic group, typically one that is a minority or marginalized power by the people to enforce that prejudice. So one thing to kind of highlight is some people are using the term lately reverse racism, and it's a social construct that does not or exist, because when we look at racism, you have to have prejudice plus power. And so a minority group necessarily doesn't have the power. They don't have the politics and the economic status and all of those things to enforce racism on towards another group. So when you're looking at racism, you're looking at a majority of people that are able to kind of dictate or demean or various other things against a group of people that are smaller and don't have as much power as another group. Discrimination, that is the unjust action of prejudicial treatment or different categories of people.
So the next definition that we wanted to cover is diversity, which is defined as well, let me back up. So the definition of diversity is broadening, so that it's not just a focus on race and ethnic background, but also on sexual orientation, religious diversity, first generation students, international students, students with disabilities, non-traditional students, rural students, older students, students with families, the existence of societies, communities, or subcultures that differ substantially from one another. So it's making sure that there is a representation from different groups. And while this definition focused a lot on students because we do work in a school setting, it also can be expanded to people's ability to lack disabilities in general, not only in an academic setting, or it could also be their parental status, their marriage status, sexual orientation, things of that nature. So it's representation from these various groups in regards to the differences that people hold. Inclusion is the social inclusion is the process of improving the terms on which individuals and groups take part in society. So it's improving the ability, the opportunity, and dignity of those disadvantaged on the basis of their identity. And so the way to differentiate diversity and inclusion is, one is diversity is just representation. We have people represented from various backgrounds, different races, religions, etc. Inclusion is making sure that not only are they represented in a certain space, but they're included in decision making, they're included in having a level of authority in certain positions. It's also making sure that they feel comfortable in those spaces. And how that happens is through having conversations around it, not making assumptions, because although some groups share many characteristics and they're identified based on those shared characteristics, no group or person is monolithic. Like, everyone has different experiences. So it's making sure that we're acknowledging that, yes, we all have differences. We want to have representation, but we also want to make sure you as an individual, you coming to this space with those differences, feel included and are given the authority and decision-making power similar to any other person that is within that diverse group.
So some more definitions for you guys. So microaggression, the everyday, subtle, intentional, and oftentimes unintentional interactions or behaviors that communicate some sort of bias towards historically marginalized groups. And so with that, you also have the micro assaults, micro insults, and micro invalidations. So when we're using microaggression, just to kind of paint a picture of it for you, when you have people that will intentionally mess up something about your culture, your heritage, about who you are. So that's when you're intentionally maybe saying someone's name wrong, incorrectly. You know how to say it, or you can just ask how to say it, but you're intentionally messing it up. It could be kind of labeling them in a specific group, not knowing, again, anything about their character or their background. It's kind of just having like that bias and painting a picture of a person without actually knowing anything about them and not even trying to learn anything about them. So it's someone's intent, and again, it can be unintentional, but it's that kind of conversation that you're having that is making someone feel less than what they are, and not looking at the full scope and the full picture of who they are.
This next slide we're going to talk about is relevant to our younger children, because sometimes it comes up that, when do we start talking about race with children? Is it really necessary to talk to younger children? And based on research, that the answer is yes. And so to kind of walk through this graph, and sorry if you can't see it, I know the writing is a little small on the screen, but it shares outcomes from different studies. The first being that at birth, babies look equally at faces of all races. At 3 months, babies look more at faces that match the race of their primary caregiver. And so that's telling, even at a very young age, that babies are able to differentiate like color and facial features, and things that feel similar to what they're used to seeing are the ones that they'll veer toward more. Children as young as 2 years old use race to reason about people's behavior. And so that's also telling at a very young age, and it really qualifies the fact that they're able to notice those differences at a really young age. By 30 months, most children use race to choose their playmates, and expressions of racial prejudice often peak at around age 4 and 5 years old. By 5 years old, Black and Latinx children in research settings show no preference toward their own groups compared to white children at the same age who strongly favor folks that are of the same racial or have the same type of characteristics as their own. By kindergarten, children show many of the same racial attitudes that adults in our culture hold. They have already learned to associate some groups with higher status than others. And then by the age about 5 to 7 years old, those explicit conversations are starting to happen. And interracial friendships can dramatically improve in their racial attitude. So if they're having the exposure of playing with and associating like fun, happy times with a group that does not necessarily look the same as them, they have improved attitudes and bias towards those various groups. And also to note that young children notice and think about race. And we often, as adults, worry about talking about it. And we think that, oh, we're going to encourage racial bias if we do. But actually, research shows that the opposite is true. And it's really not talking about it that reinforces racism, because it lets children draw their own conclusions based on the experience versus sharing with them the actual facts as it relates to interacting with, having relationships with people that are different from them. We can go to the next slide.
So why is it important to talk to your kids about race? And Kawena spoke on some of this. So being silent is not an option. Racism thrives in silence is what we continue to learn. Because again, like Kawena said, we're allowing kids to draw their own assumptions about their world and about what's going on. Research shows that talking explicitly about race with children creates a more positive attitude about people of different races. And we know America is becoming more diverse. And then our census, the US Census allowed multiple races to be selected starting in the year 2000, and 9 people identified as multiracial in 2013. So we're not just box checkers anymore like we once were. People are discovering more about their history, they're discovering more about their ancestry, and realizing that maybe it's not as black and white, obviously, as what we once thought that it was. People in 2020 are representative of so many different types of color and culture and religion and just everything. And we need to let kids understand that the world is changing and kids are so adaptable. They're able to adapt with it, but they just need the information and they need to know kind of what's going on around them in order to be more open-minded about all of it.
So a couple of other reasons why it's important to talk to our children about race and racism. So like stated before, even babies notice differences. So if we know that babies notice differences, we know that as children are getting older, they're also noticing differences, and probably it's more prevalent because they're interacting with other children and they're becoming more acclimated to people that have different experiences as them as they get older. It's also important to note that the US media is not fair or unbiased. And so if we left it up to media, which we know our children are on social media a lot, they like to watch television and movies, maybe not the news so much like us adults, well, at least some of us, I like watching the news, but recognizing that because that outlet is biased, it can be super influential on the way that children view the world, the way they view people that are different. And so it's important that, again, to have these conversations so that it's rooted in facts, not based on the bias of a media outlet. Even on social media, I don't know if anyone's seen The Social Dilemma on Netflix, but it shows that when you like certain posts, like they automatically start popping up. So if they tend to lean toward, oh, I like, this because these people look this way, that's perpetuated even within our social media systems with algorithms to like keep that type of stuff popping up for them. And so again, it just kind of skews their perspective and what they are getting access to. Another reason it's important to talk to kids is because it cultivates positive identity formation. That's really important for minority groups. There was a time where there weren't a lot, or if any, positive images that were depicted publicly. And so that really can hinder a person's self-identity if it is, oh, every time I see TV, I don't see anyone that looks like me. So does that mean that I'm not worthy of being on TV, or that they are special and I am not? And so again, getting back to that fact-based conversation to help them understand what it means to be different and how that impacts their identity and talking through it. Also, prepares children to live in a diverse global community. As Nikki shared earlier about the census information shifting, we know that our society is becoming more and more diverse as time goes by. And so we want our kids to be prepared to live in a super diverse world. We're better knowing more about cultures and different people. And so that's important. And then also learning to recognize the signs of negative perceptions and experiences to give them the support that they need. So if we're allowing a safe space for our children to talk about racial experiences that they have, we validate those feelings based on those experiences. And then we're also able to lend them the social and emotional help that they need in order to navigate that. So an example would be, if a child was experiencing discrimination, but maybe they can't put the word discrimination to it, they just know that someone treats that kid better than they treat me. And they seem to have similarities and I don't. And I feel different. And so again, it's creating that space to have that conversation and helping them navigate that so that they don't internalize it and just carry it throughout life without processing.
So also a lot of what you'll see on social media and even in magazines or newspapers or whatever it is, the colorblind parenting approach. And the core of I don't see color is I don't see my own color because my race and culture is the center of the universe. So that's the message that we're giving off. When we're talking about we're raising our kids to not see color, that in itself there is a privilege because not every child is able to float through earth, going through life and school and everything, being colorblind and not recognizing the differences, like Queena was saying, in themselves versus their teachers and coaches and whoever they're interacting with on a daily basis. So the idea of a colorblind society, though it might be well intentioned, leaves people without the language to discuss race and examine their own bias. Colorblindness relies on the concept that race based differences don't matter and ignores the realities of systemic racism. So, when we're saying we're raising our kids not to see color or we were raised colorblind, what we're saying is that they were not able to recognize that different people were experiencing different things in their life simply because of their color. So, it's like people want to look for something else that may, in their mind, interpret why so and so experienced the things that they experienced differently than they did, when simply it boils down to the fact that they're different colors. So you can't say that you don't recognize that, because then you're not validating other people's experiences. And then again, colorblindness denies the lived experiences of other people. So take a second and kind of just test yourself and ask yourself, is diversity represented in your home? So whether it's with your kids or your nieces or nephews, or when you grew up, how is diversity represented? So if you go and look through your kids' closets and you see superhero t-shirts, are any of those superheroes of color? You look at their tennis shoes, you look at the dolls that they have, you look at their bedspread and things that are on their walls. If you go and you look at all those things and you notice that there is not a single toy or t-shirt or tennis shoe or poster or whatever it is, whether it's in your kids' room or whether it's in things that you keep in your house, then that's diversity is not represented. And so what you're teaching your children is that one is better than the other. So you have children that look up to superheroes and princesses, but all they're seeing are white superheroes and white princesses. Then again, like Queen was saying, that tells them that they're not able, because of their color, to be a superhero or a princess. That's what a child of color is looking at, and that's their interpretation of it. If it's a white child and they have all of those things in it, then what they're reading is, I'm better because look at me and look at them. I can be this, but my little black friend named Timmy cannot be that. So you really have to look at how it's represented in your home, because even though parents are saying their intention is to raise their families colorblind, the message that they're giving is not something that is, you know, showing everyone to be proud of their color.
Next, I'm going to talk about some tips on anti-racist parenting. And so the first step is acknowledging that white privilege is real. And this can be a really controversial topic. I have personal experience having these conversations, and folks get offended. And that's not the intention. There's nothing about white privilege that says you should be offended by this fact. It just simply is a fact based on the foundation of our country and really our global society, that there is inherent privilege as it associates to whiteness. I like to liken that to disabilities. To make it simple, I think people can kind of all relate to disabilities. If I'm able to walk and the person next to me is not, they need assistance. Maybe they walk with a cane. And we're told that we both have to get to the fourth floor of a building. It's going to be harder for them. I have privilege. It's not that I earned it. It doesn't mean that maybe my feet don't hurt, my back don't hurt. I may have a challenge walking up the stairs. It's not to negate my experience as a person. It's only to acknowledge that walking is not one of those challenges as it relates to my peer that may have a struggle and may have to use a cane. And then there may be accommodations that are put in place. Maybe there's a ramp instead of stairs, or there's an elevator that can be taken, but still I benefit from those accommodations being made. It makes it a little easier for them, but not the easiest. It's already easy for me. And so I like to use that as an example as it relates to privilege. It's just an inherent thing that we have. It's not, that piece is not our struggle. That's it. And once we acknowledge it, we're able to address it and then move on. That's really it. And then this is kind of reiterating the point that don't pretend the color doesn't exist. And then also answer questions about race. Honestly, and factually. We cannot drill that home enough, that it's about rooting the conversation in fact. Opinions will be formed. We all have bias that can be swayed in a positive or negative way based on our experience, but it's important to really be grounded in that fact. So if your child is asking questions about race, have the conversation, don't be scared. Also start talking to kids about racism early on. So like we were talking earlier, they're noticing the differences really early. So there's these thoughts and perceptions that are already being formed. So it's important to have those conversations when they're young. Another way to be anti-racist as a parent is to be a good role model. Be that representation of diversity, be intentional about having people in your life that you associate with, that you bring around your children, that differ from you. That's important to me. It's easy to have my family around. We're all very similar. We have the same experiences, but it's important for me that my daughter has friends of different backgrounds so that she gets to learn factually about different cultures and not only rely on, like I said, media and things like that to tell her what other cultures and racial experiences are. Also, don't hide your emotions. It was shared earlier that, scared to say the wrong thing. It's okay. I mean, if it's a scary, I think it can be a scary topic for some, and people come into it not wanting to be offensive. And I think to the point that was also made by Ali about being bravery, yeah, it's about that, stepping into that space and saying, I'm going to have this conversation anyway. And even if I slip up and say something, to be honest, most people appreciate the attempt anyway and can apologize and move on. Also, it's okay to be uncomfortable in the space. I don't think anyone goes into a race conversation like, yes, this is my favorite topic. I really want to have this conversation. So it's okay to be uncomfortable, but it's very necessary for us to do that. And I truly believe the more we're uncomfortable and having the conversation, the more comfortable we will get with having it.
So empowering racially conscious children. Again, like we said earlier, we want to recognize that children experience race and that they need help. They need help to understand and contextualize it. Second, we want to make a conscious effort to share books, movies, and other media with your children that present diverse viewpoints and storylines. And then take advantage of every opportunity to talk about race in America. So I know I've heard a lot of parents, I've done a lot of reading where when protests were going on a couple of months ago, a lot of people saying that they were turning off the television, they didn't want to expose their kids to it. They weren't ready for those tough conversations. And that was the best time to have those types of conversations, because that's what was going on in the world, and that's what children need to know about. So trying to move them away from that and trying to hide that, that's not helping them. That's, again, kids are going to form an opinion, whether you help them, whether their friend helps them, whether whoever it is helps them or takes part in contributing to that. But we need to kind of help get them on track the right way. And again, we want to do that with facts, not with media, not with friends that are their same age and might not really know, everything that's going on. And even not with necessarily just teachers and textbooks, because we know that there's so much missing in our textbooks that are facts about different people's experiences. So we need to make sure that we're not relying just on the educational system to educate our children, but also what can we do to properly educate our children so that we're making sure that they get pieces of everything from everywhere, that they have all the knowledge that they need, and they can start to move forward from there.
Another tip on empowering racially conscious children is addressing the privilege that I talked about 2 slides ago, and the ways that you benefit from institutionalized racism, and then also the ways in which you can really challenge the system. And so the ways that we identify that our race benefits us in a certain structure, acknowledging it, calling it out, and then challenging it to say, how can we not do that? How can we make sure that not one group is preferred or given preferential treatment over another? That's how we challenge it. And in the same way, that's how we teach our children to be upstanders to their peers, in the same way, for them to recognize when we're in certain spaces, if I am given an advantage for a certain reason, recognizing that, calling it out and saying, I want my friend to have equal treatment as me. And then also be careful not to paint people of color as lost or persecuted souls looking for a white knight. There's nothing wrong with people of color. And I think well-intentioned, but sometimes in conversations or in an attempt to be an ally or to stand up in a space, it can come off as kind of like, I'm here to save the day. Like, I'm going to champion this change because somehow I'm going to save you from this experience. And that's not really what we're talking about when it comes to empowering racially conscious children, because it's not that any group of people needs some savior to come in. It is that we are allies, we're standing together. I recognize that you may not be treated in the same light. And so we're going to stand together in making sure that doesn't continue to be the case.
And then next we have teaching children that differences should be celebrated and not shamed. And then encourage a diverse group of friends. So that's a big one when you're saying teaching children that their differences should be celebrated and not shamed. I can't tell you how many times working on, an elementary school campus that already kids are recognizing their differences, whether it be physically or spiritually or whatever it is, and are teasing other kids already in, first, second, third grade about the fact that one child's hair texture is different, or their eye color is different, or one has freckles versus one doesn't, whatever it is, all of these things. And what I'm constantly reiterating to students is there's beauty in all of it, and none of it should make you feel ashamed. It's a beautiful thing that you have. I had one student I can remember, African American girl with green eyes, and typically people are jealous of someone with green eyes, but she felt so embarrassed and ashamed by her green eyes because she was the only person in her group of friends that had them, and they would constantly comment on the fact that her eyes are green. So it's just making sure that we're doing our part as parents, educators, whatever it is, that we're making sure that we're recognizing children's differences, but we're celebrating them and not just kind of highlighting them and moving on. Because if we mention it and then don't mention the beauty in it or how it's amazing, then they just kind of think, okay, well, it's someone else that noticed that I'm different, and it's not, doesn't feel like a good thing. And then again, encouraging the diverse group of friends, like Queena was saying with her daughter, if you're able to send your children to a school or put them on a sports team or whatever it is where they're able to be around all colors of the rainbow, basically, then do that and encourage that and invite those children's families into your home, when you're able to, and kind of have those conversations so that your child is able to see this person, that's important in my life has friends that represent everything. So obviously there's nothing wrong with it, and I'm able to do the same thing. It'll become a normal way of life for them. Sorry, I think I skipped one.
So this slide talks about questions about differences, and so hopefully this is a little helpful in starting those conversations and figuring out, like, oh, what do I say to someone? And so I know Nikki mentioned earlier about, maybe purposely or unconsciously messing up someone's name. And so if it's your first time meeting someone and you don't know how to pronounce it, doesn't hurt to ask. instead of just trying to take a guess. I mean, you can see Nikesha's name on the screen, Kawina, like we both have very unique names, and I can't tell you how often people have messed up my name even after I've pronounced it to them like 3-4 times. And so it's okay to ask multiple times, like, oh, I don't remember. I think that that's better than continuing to just mispronounce someone's name. So that's one way to start it. Another way is like asking what language someone is speaking. I mean, language is a really big part of identity and is sometimes associated with race. And so instead of taking a guess, ask the question, don't make assumptions. There's also a way to just ask if a person minds if you ask their race or ethnicity. I like to say I feel like I'm kind of racially ambiguous and people don't know. And I have had people tell me like, oh, I know you're this or I know you're that. You don't, because it's not factual. So it's okay to just ask, like, do you mind if I ask? But I also would say tread lightly, because does race and ethnicity, does my race or ethnicity even matter? Or if you're gonna ask that question about a person's race or ethnicity when it's unclear, does it really matter? Does it shape the way you're gonna treat them or the way you interact with them? So that's something to keep in mind. I think a better way to maybe frame a question is around, can you just tell me about yourself? And let somebody identify if they want to share their race, or maybe they want to share, like my next question, do you prefer to use nationality? So maybe they look at it like, I don't want to necessarily frame it as a race. I'd rather talk about my nationality, or maybe what's more important to me is my status as a parent, or my relationship status, however they want to. Or and when we're talking about children, you know, they may want to associate it based on what grade they're in, what their favorite subject in school is, or what do they like to play, what's their favorite video game. So really leaving that as an open, broad question allows us to hear from kids how they want to identify themselves. And if they offer race, then I think that's a real indicator that race is a big part of something that they're thinking about and they're conscious of within themselves. And more along the lines of, do you prefer to use your nationality? This is one that I get tripped up with. So I typically always refer to the Latin community as Latinx. That's what I feel like that's kind of like an all-encompassing term. But the reality is there are Chicano, Chicanas that prefer to be referred in that way, or maybe they prefer the broad Hispanic context. That's not for me to decide. I think it's appropriate to just ask someone what they prefer. In the same way, some people have a preference for Black versus African American, or what they feel is more politically correct. And the same could be said for identifying a person or referring to a person as white versus Caucasian. Or maybe they say, I really don't care. Use them however you want to. And then I think within the Asian community, because there are many like countries within the continent of Asia, some prefer to be identified that way by their nationality, because Korean is different than Japanese versus Chinese or Filipino. And so it's like letting people really share who they are, how they want to be identified, and us not as people making those assumptions, because again, that validates, particularly for our kids, that their culture, their race, their ethnicity is important, and we're going to listen to them and honor that.
So a little more on combating racism. So again, we don't want to shush or shut them down if they mention race. We want to name it. So again, it's not something that should be a secret. It's not something that we should be ashamed of. If your child comes to you and is asking questions, if you don't know the answers, I mean, you can get back to them. You can look it up, and you can provide them with factual information once you're able to better answer their question. But again, if they're asking questions, then it's a conversation that we want to start having, and we can't we can't decide when it's a good time to start having those conversations with children. If a child is asking, then that's a good time, not when you feel like you're ready to have the conversation. And again, also though, we don't want to wait for kids to bring it up. So if you catch them watching something on TV, or if you notice something about their friends, or a comment that they make, whatever it is, that's your time. Those are all your times to address that with kids. Or again, if you know it's big in the media and you know that they're seeing it, those are times that you want to bring those up. When you bring it up, don't start with a jarring racial experience. So you don't want to, if you had an experience, if you're a Caucasian woman and you had an experience with an Hispanic male that at one point, robbed you, that's not how you want to start the racial discussion with your kids about, well, yeah, I remember I was robbed by a Hispanic guy, because you're painting the picture for them at that point of this experience. Okay, so now anytime I'm out by myself, or anytime I'm out, I need to watch out for Hispanic men. That's not the experience that we want to begin our racial discussion with. You want to be proactive, helping them build a positive awareness of diversity. So again, you're talking about the things that you're bringing into their home, into your home, and what you can do to make sure that it's representative of everyone that your child might see when they walk out of your front door. When a child experiences prejudice, grown-ups need to both address the feelings and fight the prejudices. So again, you want to make sure that they feel like their feelings are validated. Okay, now what can we do to overcome that and either ensure that you don't have that kind of experience again, or prepare you? Because if you're a child of color, you probably are going to have that experience again. So what can we do to make sure that you're prepared for those kinds of things when they happen? You don't have to avoid topics like slavery or the Holocaust. Instead, give the facts and focus on resistance and allies. So again, Black culture didn't start with slavery. It wasn't slavery and then Martin Luther King and then everything is great. That's kind of what we're telling our kids. So you want to give them the full picture. You want to give them facts. You want to let them know that this happened for this length of time and it took all of X, Y, and Z to overcome it. But before they had this experience in their life, there were hundreds and thousands of years of beautifulness, before slavery. This is not the only part. It's not even the biggest part of Black culture. And the Holocaust is not the biggest part of their culture. There's so much going on, and there's so many other experiences that have taken place. Don't be afraid to say the wrong things, but be conscious and careful. Representation matters. So again, we're talking about our toys, our books, media, relationships, exposure. We want to make sure that we're recognizing all of that and including all of that in our home when we're able, so that children are able to see all of it. And then honor difference. Uniqueness is what makes everybody special.
So this is a really cool quote that just says, "We may be uncomfortable talking about race, but we can no longer afford to be silent. We have chosen a profession like parenting. It requires us to put our comforts second to those of our children." And I think this is really important for us as adults, whether we're in a parenting capacity or a working capacity within an education system, to really look at it from that standpoint, that we acknowledge it's uncomfortable, like stated before, but there's such a positive outcome from living in that discomfort and continuing the conversation anyway.
So, how parents and educators can work together. I've spoken to a lot of parents over years and have listened to their frustrations with the education system, but then I've also, being in education now, I've listened to educators talking about their frustrations with parents and feeling like they're not um, coming onto campus and working together. So, some ways that parents and educators can work together are name anti-Black racism for what it is. So, parents, if you're seeing something that your child is bringing home that you're uncomfortable with, let the teacher know, let the principal know, let the school district know. And educators can do the same thing if they're teaching something that they know just doesn't seem quite right. Or maybe they're teaching something and they know that they're not teaching it to the best of their ability because they don't know everything about it. then if you want to bring someone else in that may know more about that topic, then there's nothing wrong with that. It's making sure that you guys are working together to make sure that children are getting the best experience and the facts about everything that they're learning in school. We want to believe Black students. So again, we have parents that sometimes their child comes home and they tell them about their day, and the parent may not believe the magnitude of what the child is saying. And then you have the child that goes and tells a teacher about what happened, and the teacher might not believe the magnitude of what the child is saying. So you have a child kind of stuck in the middle of starting to feel frustrated and not understanding why I'm having these experiences and no one is listening to me, no one is believing me. Stop challenging Black Lives Matter. That's something I think Kawait and I could talk about forever and a day, but we're on limited time. But Black Lives Matter is simply that. It's not saying that other lives don't matter. It's not saying that your life is less valuable. It's not about some of the people, the small group of people that have been out holding Black Lives Matter signs, but have been protesting inappropriately. It's not all of that is not what we're talking about. When people are saying Black Lives Matter, they're simply saying they matter. That's it. And if you could support me in my struggle, and recognize that I am at a disadvantage for whatever reason. I don't have the same privileges as you for whatever reason. It does not mean, again, like Quinn said earlier, that I don't have some privileges. I can recognize myself, and what I've gone through in my life has been better than a lot of people that are the same color as me. So I recognize that I have privileges even as a Black person. But again, I can recognize that someone else, simply for the fact that they're not Black, has more privilege than I do. So there's levels to all of it. And it's just saying, again, lives are important, and just validate that. Identify and speak about Black and Brown experiences. So again, you're listening to other people's experiences and recognizing that theirs may have been different from your own. And then if you are able to join your child's PTA, African American Advisory Committee, ELAC, all of those things, every campus has a variety of clubs and things for parents that parents are able to participate in. And there's really no limit to what can be done once you have a whole lot of parents that are involved in the education of their child. Things can look so much better when there's parent involvement, working with the teachers and other staff members on campus.
This slide is just showing a couple of resources that you can purchase for your children. And so there are books that really explore differences as it relates to race. And I think it's a good way to start the conversation. Or it could be suggestions for having that representation. If you don't have books that really show different colored faces or different shapes of faces. So just a couple of suggestions. The one book at the top right corner, so you want to talk about race, is really aimed at an older population of students, but as you can tell, some of these are for younger. So there's actually a full gamut of books with different reading levels that can be chosen from, but we just chose a few to kind of show you.
And then here are our resources. And I think we can have those posted somewhere else later, but I think we will end this video, or in this presentation, with a video. It's about 3 minutes on 5 tips for being an ally. I'm going to attempt. Let me know if you guys gotta love ads.
This sentence is grammatically correct. Hey friends,
Okay.
so I'm trying something different with
Give me a thumbs up if you can hear it.
I don't know if it's working, but you will deal. Imagine your friend.
You turn it up a little.
And they ask you to help. Well, you've never built a house before, so it'd probably be a good idea for you to put on some protective gear and listen to the person in charge. Otherwise, someone's going to get seriously hurt. Look, I'm helping. It's the exact same idea when it comes to being an ally. An ally is a person that wants to fight for the equality of a marginalized group that they're not a part of. We need your help building this house, but you probably should listen so you know what to do first. Here are my 5 tips for being a good ally. Understand your privilege. Now, a lot of people get hung up on the word privilege, so let me break it down for you nice and easy. Privilege does not mean that you are rich, that you've had an easy life, that everything's been handed to you and you've never had to struggle or work hard. All it means is that there are some things in life that you will not experience or ever have to think about just because of who you are. It's kind of like those horses that have those blinders on. They can see just fine. There's just a whole bunch of stuff on the side that they don't even know exists. So for example, there are currently 29 states where you can legally be fired for being gay, and there are 34 states where you can legally be fired for being trans. Now, as a straight cis woman, those are things that I don't have to ever think about if I don't want to. I'm not going to be fired because I'm straight, and I'm not going to be fired because I am cis. So it makes sense that before I can fight for the rights of others, I have to understand what rights I have and others don't. That's privilege. Listen and do your homework. It sounds like a no-brainer, but it's not possible for you to learn if you aren't willing to listen. So you got to know when to zip up the lip up. I don't know. You get what I mean. But that's the thing that's so cool about social media. There are so many people sharing their stories all around the world and connecting with people that they normally would never get a chance to without the power of the internet. So do your homework. Start reading blogs, tweets, news articles, and stories so that you can get caught up on the issues that are important to the communities that you want to support. Speak up, but not over. If the Fight for Equality was a girl group, the ally wouldn't be the lead singer or the second lead singer. They'd be Michelle. An ally's job is to support. You want to make sure that you use your privilege and your voice to educate others, but make sure to do it in such a way that does not speak over the community members that you're trying to support or take credit for things that they are already saying. This isn't Mario Kart. Stay in your lane. Realize that you're going to make mistakes and apologize when you do. Nobody's perfect. Unlearning problematic things takes time and work, so you are bound to mess up and trip and fall. But don't worry, you can brush yourself off and get right back up. And back up! Just remember that it's not about your intent, it's about your impact. So when you get called out, make sure to listen, apologize, commit to changing your behavior, and move forward. Last, but certainly not least, actually the most important thing on this list is remember that ally is a verb. Saying you're an ally is not enough. You gotta do the work. 1 through 4. 1 through 4. As always, there are links in the video description box to some of the things I mentioned in this video, along with some resources that have been really helpful for me as I've gone along in my journey to be more conscious. So I want to hear from you in the comments. What are some sites that you suggest checking out? And what are some things that have helped you become a better ally? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and help see you when I see you. Bye!
Hear someone go, didn't it come from you guys? We deserve respect.
Okay. I don't know if anyone has any questions for us. Anything that they feel like they need more information on.
I don't see any questions in the chat.
Well, I think we're good. I think that's all we have. We can stay on.
We can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now? I think my earphones. Okay, if you guys have any questions, I mean, we can stay on if you want to ask us privately or whatever it is. But other than that, I think we are done. So thank you guys for coming.
Yes, thank you.